Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel, and today we are talking about G2's performance at the VCT Americas Kickoff tournament. So G2 came into VCT Americas as the Ascension team, so the team that made it all the way through the Tier 2 gauntlet last year, winning in Sao Paulo to get that spot in franchising. This roster was, of course, the Guard, and then the Guard dropped all this roster because they don't want to be an org anymore, and then G2 picked up the slack, and now they have the spot. So I think coming into this tournament and just coming into VCT Americas as a whole, there is some pressure on G2 to perform. No one knows how these Tier 2 teams are going to do. There's this whole discussion around Valorant that because they have this franchise system, the gap between Tier 2 and Tier 1 isn't really that far because there aren't a lot of spots in the Tier 1 system for players that probably could compete in it. So if you're Riot, do you want these teams to do good? Do you think it would look good on your Tier 1 system if the Tier 2 teams that come up end up dominating? So maybe you would want them to not do very well, or would you want these teams to do very well so that you can prove that your Tier 2 system of Ascension is actually successful? But instead of talking about those kind of implications, let's talk about G2's performance at the actual tournament, because I am cheering for this team. I am rooting for this team. I've been a fan of them since they were the Guard. All the way back in 2022 when this roster flew onto the scene and ended up being one of the best teams in North America, and then unfortunately couldn't do any damage at the international level, and then couldn't make an international tournament after that. And instead of taking Tier 1 offers, these players decided to stay together, and then it worked. It paid off for them, and now they're here, so I really want them to do well, and I do think that there's a lot of pressure on this team. So let's start off by looking at the stats of all these players throughout the entire tournament. Starting off with Trent, who I do think is probably their best player. I think most people would probably agree with me on that. When the Guard first came onto the scene, he was seen as one of the best players in the world in that short period of time. That quickly went away as soon as they had a bad performance at Reykjavik. But Trent is seen as a really good Yun star in Valorant at this point, so there is some expectation that he does really well. So how did he do? Overall, pretty good. He had 200 kills, 200 deaths, 87 assists for key ratio of 1 exactly, only playing Viper throughout this entire time, and I think that makes sense for him. With Trent, he plays that Viper character because he is very, very good on it. He is a controller, he does play that role, and he is quite good on it, but at the same time, do you maybe want him to be a bit more flexible with it? Last year at the Tier 2 level, he was playing a bit more of a flex role. He played a bit of Sova, Raze, Skye, and Fade, and I would expect him throughout the season to maybe play some of those other roles because I don't see him just playing Viper throughout the whole year, but he is very good on it, and I think he had a good showing. He definitely had some down maps, some down beats, but overall, I think Trent's debut at Tier 1 did overall go pretty well for him. Moving on to Leaf, so this team's addition in the offseason after they lost Tex to Leviathan. This is the second time this roster has had to replace their duelist player because, of course, we had Saya player go to T1 at the end of 2022. So Leaf, being one of the better duelist players in Americas last year, seemed like he should be a pretty good pickup. So how did he do? He had 244 kills, 211 deaths, 56 assists for a key ratio of 1.15. Throughout the tournament, he played Raze, Yoru, and Jett. Leaf definitely had some big moments, definitely had some good maps, and having a solid KD ratio means that he's doing his job. But at the same time, there were a lot of moments where Leaf probably lost around for G2. I saw just a lot of times where he looked a bit lost or he made a big play that just didn't end up paying out. And it was frustrating to watch him at times. I mean, it was frustrating to watch this team in general as a person who wants his team to do really well. But Leaf definitely, it's going to take him some time to truly fit into this roster. And I do expect him to feel a bit more comfortable and do really well during the regular season. Moving on to JonahP, who in my opinion was this team's best player throughout the entire tournament. He had some really clutch moments, he had some really good plays, and he was one of their better performers on some of their maps. He had 195 kills, 199 deaths, 103 assists for K ratio of 0.97. He played Sova, Breach, and KO. So being that initiator role, I do think JonahP is a really solid player for that. I am a bit surprised his KD ratio is under 1 because he did have just a lot of kills and some maps where he just fragged out randomly. So that is a bit surprising, but overall, JonahP, I do think he probably performed the best just overall in making those big moments work. So I really hope he carries that momentum into the regular season. Moving on to Net, who had an up and down performance in my opinion. He had 209 kills, 208 deaths, 54 assists for key ratio of 1. It's like 1.0001 or whatever, but it's just one. He had one more kill than death. He played Cypher and Killjoy, so playing that Sentinel role. I really hope we see more of what Net can do at the Tier 1 level. I'm a bit concerned about him being this team Sentinel player. Not that I think he's bad or anything, and he did have some good moments. And Sentinel is one of the easier roles in Valorant, so hopefully we can see him truly become that elite Sentinel player for this team, but I am a bit concerned of him being able to pick up the slack if his teammates aren't performing. Can this team survive maps where Trent and Leaf aren't playing to their best? Do they truly have a safety net with players like Net to be able to absorb that kind of, dull performance that you're inevitably going to be seeing from your best players every now and then? But overall, Net didn't play bad, and there's nothing really to tell me that he's going to have a bad season. I just think he needs to refine his game a bit better, and then hopefully we see him play a bit more consistently. Moving on to their IGL in Valen, he had 189 kills, 209 deaths, 111 assists for KD ratio of 0.90. He was on the Smokes role, playing Harbor, Omen, and Brimstone. Valen is a great IGL. You're not really looking for him to be the kind of guy that's going to frag out and just take over a map. He did have some good moments. There were some miscues, like when I believe his nature was defusing and he just didn't peek him. So there are some miscues like that happened, but overall I do think Valen, his value comes from being a great IGL. I think he's one of the main reasons why this team's chemistry is really good. When he's going against some of the other best IGLs in Americas, we're going to have to see him step up his game a bit, because from what I saw from this team and just the calling overall and just the overall coordination, it was rough in this kickoff tournament. But again, it's one tournament, so it doesn't really matter too much, but they have to shore up those kind of things and those miscues and that just, not reading the play properly, and Valen has to be a big part of that. And what's interesting about this team is him playing that smoke role with Trent only playing Viper, is that this team was always running double controller, which does surprise me a bit, because double controller, while it is still a good comp on certain maps, I don't think it's as valuable as it was last year. We've seen some solid comps come from double initiator. We've seen teams just throw out super wacky random comps, and it being a kickoff tournament, that's not really surprising, because, throwing something out, just like Loud did on their just insane Ascent comp with Phoenix, having those kind of wacky out-of-the-box comps, that can work. And it just felt like G2 was playing certain comps and playing a kind of way that worked for them last year, because it worked for a lot of teams last year, especially with that double controller, but it doesn't seem like they're getting as much value out of it right now, especially against some of these top teams that know that kind of comp very well and that know how to adapt. Whereas in Tier 2, they didn't have to deal with that as much. So now we're going to go through the matches that they played throughout the entire tournament, and I just want to say it was so endlessly frustrating watching this team, because they had moments where they looked super good, they looked really just on cue, looking like they can just take over maps, and then sometimes they just blew it. They just blew a lead, and it was really tough to watch. Starting with their first match on February 18th versus Crew, they won that one 2-1. We're going to be talking about the maps that they both lost and won on, and in this match they won Sunset and Ascent, and they lost on Icebox. So Sunset is a map that I'm going to be talking about in this video. I do not want to see this team play Sunset that much anymore. I'm done. So they played this map 5 times, and I'll be talking about those times when we get to them. But Sunset, they won on Sunset against Crew, but they couldn't beat anybody else on it. And it just seems like they just got so heavily anti-stratted after that Crew match that it was just really tough. They did win on it, and they did have a good Ascent to close it out, especially doing the comeback after Crew was up 7-5 after their attack half. So going into G2's attack side, they were at a huge disadvantage because Ascent is a very defender-sided map, but they ended up pushing through and winning that map. So that was impressive. You have a good comeback. It's against Crew, so it's not a super high-ranked team, but you play this first match in Tier 1, and then you shake off your jitters. All the nervousness not gone. You know what you're dealing with now. You know where you are. So going into the next match, it's against EG. It's a team nobody has seen yet. It's brand new, because this roster has just been completely blown up, and now it's new except for Giacomo. So there's a lot of unexpected going on here. But what is expected is G2 not playing poorly and not blowing a 7-0 lead. This match, cheering for G2, was so tough for me. It was such an annoying process. They were up on both maps. Both maps they had a lead on. They lost on Sunset in overtime after being up 8-1 in the first half, and then EG just stormed their way back, and then they end up losing on Icebox 11-13. So, they lost on Icebox both times, so clearly that's a map that they should start banning now. But you also lost on Sunset, which is a map that you won on against Crew. So This was just a really tough match overall. I do think G2 should have won. I think EG, to their credit, they played really well. But G2, they were not playing 100%. There was just certain miscues, there were certain timings, and just certain strategies that just were not working for this team. They had some decent ideas, they had some good plays, but it was just really frustrating seeing this team lose to EG, especially just in the way that they did. If they had taken this one to a third map, I might have been a little bit more happy, but it's just like, you cannot, I don't care how well EG played, you cannot lose after you are up 8-1 in the first half. I know leads in Valorant are very, very fragile, but even with EG winning the last couple of rounds of the first half, you need to close that out. After that first half, you just can't lose that. So they end up rematching Crew on February 25th, and they take it to Crew. This was probably overall their best match of the entire tournament. They win that one 2-0. Both maps winning 13-8. They win on Split and they win on Sunset. Where their first match against Crew, it looked like there was a decent chance Crew was going to win that. They had the lead, as I said, on Ascent, and they did take the first map. In this match, they were ready for it. They were ready to redeem themselves after that Evil Geniuses loss. So they win it pretty well, and then they go into the play-ins. So I will say this, their draw with play-ins was pretty difficult. I mean, being the team that plays the last two matches, that's probably the worst position to be in, where Sentinels definitely were in the best position playing first and then playing last, because then if you win that first match of the day, you're kind of just sitting pretty because you know that you have a pretty big advantage going into that final match of the day, which they did, and we'll talk about that when we get to it. But this match versus MIBR, what happened? What happened, guys? How did you lose this? This was just, I kept thinking this was a 2-0 because of how bad it went for G2, but no, it was a 2-1. So they did take a map. They won on Split, but then they lost on Sunset and Breeze. And with Split, they had to win that one in overtime. They lost Sunset 13-9, and then Breeze 10-13. So, Breeze being kind of close, Sunset, only being one round less than Breeze. But overall, it's like, MIBR, I do think they're going to surprise a lot of teams this year. They're definitely playing that spoiler role to teams like G2. They seem very well coached, and while they don't have a ton of high-end talent, they do have really good strategies and really good structure and fundamentals. But this is a match that G2, you have to win this one. You have to put yourself in a position where you can go the distance with Sentinels and have it mean something. So an overall rough match for them. They absolutely should have won it. They did win one map, and I thought after that maybe they can bring it back. And they had the lead going into the end part of that match on the last map, but they just couldn't close it out, and MIBR made the comeback to win. Then we get to their match against Sentinels, which was a 2-1 victory for G2, but that is not the whole story behind it. Sentinels just needed one map win to make it to the playoff stage, and that first map was Sunset. And what I don't understand is that you have been losing on this Sunset map. You did win against Crew on it, as I've said a couple times now, but you've lost to two other good teams. Why would you pick it against Sentinels? Sentinels are known to be good on this map. I think they might have a bit of trouble on it going forward because now they've played that map so much and teams are going to anti-strat them. But you've been struggling on this map since that Evil Geniuses match. Why would you choose it against a team that is known to be good on it? They banned Icebox, which I understand they couldn't win on that map, but I just don't understand why they would choose that as the map that you're starting with, especially starting with, in an elimination match where Sentinels only need one map to win. It's just a bad choice in my opinion, and I don't understand why that was the choice that they made. I understand banning Icebox because they lost twice on that one, they couldn't win on it. And then of course they lost, Sentinels make it to playoffs, and then we have the other two maps which they won on, and hey, they have a perfect record on Split in this tournament. Split looks like it could be a good map for them. But those last two maps didn't really matter because Sentinels, they were trying to win, but it was overall, they weren't trying as hard as they were previously because they already made it to playoffs. They didn't have to. They even admitted it was hard to try. So G2 probably been more motivated to win that one just, out of pride more than anything, but it doesn't really, give me a lot of confidence in their performance. If, you can play like that on your last two maps when it doesn't matter, but when it really does matter, you make a poor choice with your map pool and you lose on it. So that is G2's performance at VCT Americas Kickoff. And overall, it's a decent debut for this team. As much as it frustrated me and as probably heated as I got during this video, they did perform overall decently. Making it to play-in is good. They were only really able to beat Crew. They did beat Sentinels, but as I said, those last two maps were a wash. So if they just end up playing Crew for the rest of the season, they're in a good position because they can beat them every time, apparently. But it's just some disappointing losses against teams that they probably should have beaten, at least just looking at the rosters one by one. But it's a learning experience for this team. There's still a bunch of young guys. They have some more land experience now, but there is still a long way to go for this team to really show what they can truly do. Let me know what you guys thought of G2's performance at VCT Americas Kickoff in the comment section down below. Do you think this team's going to be good? Do you think this tournament and this performance is indicative of how they're going to do in the future? Or are they going to end up dominating and actually become one of the top teams in Americas? Please click like if you enjoyed this video. Thank you all very much for watching. I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye.